Almost half the coffee that's produced has some level of ochratoxin or other mycotoxins in it. Farmers sell everything. The only other thing I was going to say that concerns me about mold spores and poor food safety habits of roasters is if you let mold spores fall into your roasted coffee. Let's say now somebody takes that coffee, puts it in their grinder, and now if somebody does a cold brew, and I was talking to somebody just over the weekend, I was at a festival in El Salvador, and this cafe owner was telling me about this really cool ambient, meaning room temperature, water drip system they use for their cold brew. And it's 18 hours in the ambient temperature. Now, this is where I would get concerned that you're going to drink a cup of pathogens, because 18 hours dripping, yes, coffee is antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, but still 18 hours in room temperature. And then it gets put in a funnel into bottles with a cork. And
so you might actually be drinking mold if you're dealing with these ambient temperature, room temperature, cold brews. You'd rather see it hot where there's a kill step, or very, very cold, which the cold again inhibits mold. It doesn't prevent it, but inhibits mold. That cold does. So here's what I want to ask you then. If there is a fair amount of lower grade, actually moldy coffee, let's say we do have that poorly transported coffee from origin, it's actually moldy. You said some of that coffee still gets used. Where does that moldy coffee go?
Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing. Look, specialty coffee gets put into plastic bags, food safe plastic bags that are special for grains. And when they're put in those bags, and then those bags are put into burlap bags, the coffee is pretty protected there. But not all coffee uses those plastic bags. Specialty does. So some of the bigger, like the more mainstream coffees, like when I go to these huge warehouses in Brazil and Colombia, I mean, the stacks are like, you can't even see. I don't even know how they stack the coffee that high. It's just burlap and coffee. There's no plastic. And we know burlap is pretty loosely woven. I used to bring in coffee from our farm in Zimbabwe. And one year there was a crack in the corner of one container. It was tiny crack. You couldn't even see the crack until you went into the light. Somebody stood with a flashlight. Finally, we could see where the crack was. But this coffee had come from Zimbabwe. And on one stack inside the container, there was one corner of each one of the bags was fused together with mold because the water had been draining and going into these sacks of coffee.
Whoa.
For the entire trip, we had to pull all of those out, and all of those sacks of coffee had to be thrown away. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you that it was like fused together. Now, this may happen in other ways. There may be other moisture that comes in. And so, we have to be careful. And we very often, at Purity, we test the coffee before it leaves origin, and then we test it on arrival. We get arrival samples and we check.
What about other people who maybe have those moldy beans and need to get rid of them? I mean, farmers sometimes need to get rid of these subpar products.
Right.
Who's drinking that? Are a lot of people drinking this coffee that just got kind of kill stepped?
I just was, poking around the internet, trying to get a hold of how much coffee actually is contaminated. And based on all the research I can find, almost half the coffee that's produced has some level of ochratoxin or other mycotoxins in it. And that coffee, you don't know if it's specialty or if it's commercial grade or if it's really low class grade coffee. Look, we know the lowest grade coffees. Farmers sell everything, right? They sell their lowest grade coffee. Somebody buys it. Sadly, it's very often that lowest grade coffee sold on the local markets.
Because they send off their best beans, obviously. Those are the ones you sell. And then at the origin, sometimes they're drinking this lowest grade coffee. That's interesting.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe not the producers, but
Sure.
the local coffee shops. They don't get the top grade coffee. Or if they do, whoever is buying it locally is paying the export price that the farmer would have got for it. Right.
I had not thought about that. Wow. So that's kind of sad. Like you said, the farmers have to sell this quality of beans, so they're going somewhere.
Yeah, and also Intercontinental Exchange, that does the commodity coffee trading, has a certain standard for green coffee, and they have certain defect counts. And so there is a tolerance for coffee that isn't pristine, clean.
That's a nice way to put it.
I'm trying to be diplomatic because people are drinking this. And what I have in my head is my dad. I mean, I grew up on Folgers, and Maxwell House and 8 o'clock coffee.
You know, though, Ildi, if you're drinking this coffee every single day,
that's it.
If you're drinking this coffee every single day, then maybe it's time to up the quality. If you're having a coffee at a diner every once in a while when you take the family out, hey. But if you're drinking 3 to 5 cups of this thing, it's the most like common thing that some people consume. It should be a higher quality. You should be thinking about your health, in my opinion, in this podcaster's opinion.
Well, so this is what I want our podcast to be about. No fear, just straight talk. Some of these commercial coffees have certain levels of ochratoxin. The U.S. FDA does not put a limit on ochratoxin in coffee. They do for other foods and mycotoxins in corn and wheat and oats and all the other things, wine, grapes, The European Union, 5 micrograms per kilogram in soluble coffee, instant coffee, 3 micrograms per kilogram in roasted coffee beans. So 3 is a lot. So to put people at ease, I tested the coffees my dad and I drank when I was little. They didn't even have 1 microgram of, one of them had 2 micrograms of ochratoxin. But other than that, some of these commercial ones were 0.5. They weren't a lot. Yep. And so this is where I started to say, where is all of this craziness about? But that's just ochratoxin. And so when we talk about our mycotoxin episode, I want to introduce another mycotoxin that I'm actually really worried about in the system. So teaser for that.
But that makes
stay tuned for that.
It makes sense now, Ildi. I see why this subject is so confusing. It's because we're dealing with complex things here. We're dealing with a living microorganism that comes and goes based on environmental factors, depending on the year, depending on the shipping, depending on the bags it was put in. The mold is around until roasting, but also leaves compounds behind post-roasting oftentimes in cheap coffee, but not always in cheap coffee. This is a very nuanced and confusing subject.
And low levels if you were to test it. But as you said, now my dad drank a pot of coffee a day. So if he's drinking 2 micrograms per kilo in a serving, and he's drinking a pot a day, and my dad had stage 4 kidney disease, which I've often wondered, because ochratoxin impacts the kidney. I don't want to assume, but this is the thing. So even small amounts of it can build up over time.
That's right. And so how do we as consumers, Ildi, if we want to do a call to action out there, let's say we do drink a pot of coffee a day. We don't really want any of this extra crap in our coffee every single day. What do we need to do to inform ourselves and select a higher grade mycotoxin-free, mold-free coffee?
Well, it has to be lab tested. And again, not every batch has to be tested. Sure. Because as we have talked, a coffee, when it goes into the roaster and comes out of the roaster, it's not going to be getting moldy. It's not going to be gaining any mycotoxins. So if an entire container of green coffee we know is clean, safe, free of mycotoxins, that coffee is going to be mycotoxin-free green. It's going to come out of the roaster mycotoxin-free. Those are clean, free, we're good to go. We also always have to have good food safety practices. That's it. So you work with a company that you know is doing that, and we're doing it, and I know other companies doing that. I just had a friend at a great specialty coffee. They don't do health coffee. They don't do certificates of origin, but they just passed their food safety, very strict food safety audit.
Nice.
And I'm so proud of them because there's a food safety certification called SQF. SQF is a tough food safety certification to get. And so we want to work with SQF facilities. And if you can find an SQF specialty roaster, now you're doing very well. But they still have to test the green coffee for mycotoxins, because even the cleanest, most beautiful coffee could have mycotoxin. I tested a coffee once from a South American mountainous country that was gorgeous. It was like what we call 87 points in the old way we used to cup score, which is a very high quality coffee. Sent it to the lab and it had ochratoxin in it. I couldn't believe it.
So you couldn't taste this, even as refined as your palate is.
Oh, no.
There's just no.
And it didn't burn out. And I was heartbroken. But, this is it.
And stay tuned, everybody, because I know this was an informative episode. We got a lot more on mycotoxins coming. Ildi, any final words you want to share with the listeners on this subject and going out there into the world of coffee?
Yes. Drink a coffee that has been tested for mycotoxins. Trust the certificates. If they've done the work, they're not doing it to just fake it or play. Just trust the work. They're doing it because they care, because they want to do this. You drink this sort of coffee, make sure your equipment stays clean. You keep your cold brews cold, and you keep your coffee in good sealed containers. Don't refrigerate your coffee, though. You should buy your coffee. When you open a bag of coffee, make sure you seal it airtight, but leave it on the counter in your cupboard. Oxygen, light, and moisture are the enemies of coffee.
Ildi, this was an awesome episode. Thank you so much for joining me and for talking mold. I know we could probably do a lot more, and we probably will do a lot more on mold in the future, but this is a great definitive breakdown. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. And also trust your bodies. Like our bodies can tolerate a lot, right? And so if you mold spores entering your body, probably the stomach acid's going to destroy that. Mycotoxin is another thing.
Well, I appreciate that. Like I said, always making us feel better, Ildi. Thank you again. Absolutely epic episode. I cannot wait for the mycotoxin breakdown. So viewer, please make sure you tune in, hit subscribe, hit like if you learned anything on this episode. We sure appreciate it. And stay tuned for an even deeper dive as we go into mycotoxins. That's all for today. This is Ildi Revi and Jordan River signing off, wishing you an extraordinary rest of your day. We'll see you next time on the Health First Coffee Podcast. Bye, everybody.